even after so long of using this technology, we still run into technical difficulties every once in a while. So we are now seeing attendees join. We're going to give folks a couple minutes just to filter in here, but we will get started in just a minute. All right, I think we have everyone going. So good to see everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Good afternoon. Committee members and members of the public, thank you all for joining us. As you know, I'm Cody Zeger, Director of Statewide Policy here at Cal ICH, and I have the pleasure of opening our meeting today. Thank you again for your commitment in joining us in our efforts to end and prevent homelessness in California. So a few reminders before we begin. This is a 2-hour meeting. We will do our best to keep to this time frame. However, there's always a possibility we may go over that timing slightly. Prior to this meeting, committee members were provided with a briefing packet, which is also available to the public on our website. We will try to leave some time for committee members to ask general questions toward the end of the meeting, but if we run out of time, please feel free to reach out to Cal ICH staff with any questions after the meeting. So on the next slide, we will look at the agenda briefly. So we will have our call to order and our tribal land acknowledgement. We will, and on our roll call, then we'll go to our consent calendar to approve the meeting summary from our last advisory committee meeting. Then we'll provide some time for our executive officer, Megan Marshall, to give some updates. And then we have sort of 2 longer agenda items. So the first is an overview of our action plan core elements, which is something that you all have not seen exactly in this form yet. You've seen pieces of it, but wanted to come back and share with you a more, fleshed out version that we've put together and get your thoughts on how to successfully move the action plan forward. And then we're also going to have a presentation from our state funding and programs working group co-chairs as a follow-up on some of the recommendations that you all made to the council. We wanted to come back to you and show you how your recommendations are being implemented and also get your thoughts on how to, design that work appropriately. So then we will go to general public comment and then final remarks and adjournment. So that is the agenda for our meeting today. At the end of today's meeting, there will be an opportunity for general public comment. So we allow for a maximum of 2 minutes for each comment. We welcome all public comments and feedback. Due to the structure of our public meeting we're in, we may not be able to respond to questions. So for this reason, if you have any specific questions you would like answered, we ask that you please email us at calich@bcsh.ca.gov, and I will put that email in the chat. So with that, the advisory committee to Cal ICH is hereby called to order on August 22nd, 2024 at 1:09 p.m. I'll pass it to Cal ICH's tribal liaison, Vivila Blossoming Bear, to read the tribal land acknowledgement.
Thank you. We wish to acknowledge that Sacramento is the unceded homeland of the Southern Maidu, Valley and Plains Miwok, the Nisenan people, the Patwin Wintun people, and members of the Wilton Rancheria tribe who have inhabited this landscape since time immemorial. We extend our gratitude to the ancestors of all California Native American tribes and their descendants, as we recognize that wherever we are joining from, we are all on California Native American lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivila. Now I'll pass it to Cal ICH staff member Claire Bannerman to call the roll.
Great, thank you. So I will be calling roll. Please say present or here when I call your name. All right, Ludmilla Bade.
Present.
Al Ballesteros.
Here.
Samantha Batko.
Present.
Doug Bond.
Here.
Carolyn Coleman. Joe Coletti,
Here.
Charlene. Oh, sorry, I didn't hear that. Did I get?
Present. Charlene Dimas Peinado, present.
Oh, sorry. I thought somebody else from before was chiming in. Sorry. Thank you. Vika Eisen,
Here.
Dora Gallo, Jennifer Harp Dietz, Eric Harris, Charles Helgett,
Here.
thank you, Janet Kelly, Jody Ketcheside,
Here.
Philip Mangano, Chris Martin, Mariah McGill,
Here.
thank you, Mariah, Luana Murphy, all right, I see you, Luana, thank you. Elisa Orduña,
Present.
Sharon Rapport,
Here.
Janie Roundtree, Emilio Salas, Miguel Santana, Doug Shoemaker, Sean Spear, Reba Stevens,
Present.
thank you, Megan Van Zant. I think I saw Megan earlier. Okay. Alex Bitzowski,
Present.
thank you. Javon Wilkes,
Here.
thank you. And Roxanne Wilson. Okay. Thank you. We have a quorum. I will move us on to our next agenda item, which is the consent calendar. For this consent calendar, you will be voting on the adoption of the May 21st Advisory Committee meeting summary. So we'll do public comment, and advisory committee members may also comment if they wish. Are there any committee members who would like to make a comment? Ludmilla,
Yeah, my apologies for not writing earlier. Just in the yes, in the minutes, just to clarify, I meant our current plan, not the triple bottom line, but our current plan is not fully, just that one word, thanks.
okay, great, thank you. And then I see Luana Murphy has their hand raised. Oh, okay. All right. Now I will move on to public comment, since this is an agenda item that will result in a vote. And if you would like to make a public comment, please raise your hand. If you are connected through your phone, please press *9. Okay, I see no public comment. So we will now move on. Would anybody like to motion for a vote?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we vote on this.
Thank you,
to approve.
Ludmilla.
Yep.
Would anybody like to second?
Yeah, this
Jody?
is Jody, second.
Thank you, Jody. All right. We now have a motion to adopt the May 21st Advisory Committee summary. I will now call roll for the vote. Now, please say yes or aye, no, or you may also abstain. Ludmilla Bade,
Aye.
Al Ballesteros,
Aye.
Samantha Batko,
Aye.
Doug Bond,
Aye.
Carolyn Coleman,
Aye.
Joe Coletti,
Aye.
Charlene Demas Peanado,
Aye.
Vitka Eisen,
Aye.
Dora Gallo, Jennifer Hark Dietz,
Aye.
Eric Harris, Charles Helget, Charles, I think you were here, so I don't know if I'll give you a second to unmute if you're able to.
I think Charles said his mic isn't working,
Oh,
or maybe
sorry.
just his camera.
Okay, all right, thank you. Janet Kelly, Jody Ketcheside,
Aye.
thank you. Philip Mangano, Chris Martin, Mariah McGill, Mariah, I saw you here earlier. Okay. Luana Murphy. Oh, Mariah, sorry. I didn't quite catch that.
Aye.
Thank you. Luana Murphy. Elisa Orduña.
Aye.
Sharon Rapport.
Yes.
Janie Roundtree. Emilio Salas. Miguel Santana. Doug Shoemaker. Sean Spear. Reba Stevens.
Aye.
Thank you. Megan Van Sant. Alex Fitzowski.
I'm gonna abstain because I wasn't at the meeting.
Thanks, Alex. Javon Wilkes
Aye.
and Roxanne Wilson.
Claire,
Okay.
this is Chuck Helget. I had to step away, but I vote aye.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks, Charles. Okay, great. So the motion passes, the meeting summary is approved, and I will now turn it back to Cody to facilitate the next item. Or I'm sorry, Megan Marshall, our Executive Officer for Executive Officer updates.
Thank you, Claire. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Megan Marshall. I'm the Cal ICH Executive Officer. Thank you all for joining us here today, both advisory committee members and members of the public. As many of you are aware, the governor issued Executive Order N-124 in response to the Supreme Court decision to the city of Grants Pass v. Johnson. The order is a directive for state departments to develop internal policies to humanely and urgently address encampments on state property. Members of the Cal ICH Council, the Advisory Committee, which is this body, of course, and members of the Lived Experience Advisory Board received an invitation to join city and county leadership for a briefing today at 3 p.m. The executive order is not on today's advisory committee agenda and will not be discussed in this forum. But we hope members that received the invitation, which again was all members of the advisory committee, can join us today at 3 p.m. If you have questions or comments regarding the EO, please post those during public comment at the end of today's advisory committee agenda. And again, please join us for the 3 p.m. briefing. So with that, I'll ask Cody to move us on in the agenda.
Oh, I see a hand, Alex, yeah?
Yeah, thank you so much, Megan, for that update, and appreciate that there is a space being created to talk about the EO. I do feel like in our capacity as advisory committee members, you know, there might be some conversation there. And so I did just want to quickly add a couple comments, which I'll be very brief, but in light of the EO, I think it's important to remember that first, you know, encampments are about human beings that need housing, not about piles of trash. And so we want to ensure that we're always keeping people at the center of the conversation about encampments. The second thing is, you know, the only sustainable solution to encampments, I think, is connecting people to housing and services that meet their needs. And there's a lot of different ways to do that, and a lot of different ways service providers go about doing work at encampments and resolving encampments, and that can mean a lot of different timelines. I don't know of any of those timelines that are kind of 48 to 72 hours. So I just wanted to add that. And then the last thing I just want to add is, you know, we're only going to solve homelessness when different levels of government, city, county, and state, work in collaboration with each other, not pointing fingers at each other. So thanks.
Thank you, Alex. I do see that there are other hands raised. I will just say we need to move on in today's agenda. All members received an invitation to attend today at 3 p.m. Those comments will have time and space and will be very much appreciated in the 3 p.m. briefing. So with that, I will kindly ask for Cody to move us on in the agenda. Thank you.
Okay, so I will go to the next agenda item then. So this agenda item is about our action plan core elements. So something that you all have heard about. I'm sorry, I can't. So we've talked about the action plan in these meetings in the past. One thing that we wanted to bring back to you all is sort of the summary of the work that we have done to date. So as you know, the action plan has changed in a few key ways, but there's a few items or elements of the plan that we want to make sure everyone has sort of a good grasp of. And particularly that is around our goals. So I know that we had spoken with you all about the goals of the plan in multiple forums, right, at multiple different times. And so we have come to more of a conclusion around that topic. So we'll go over that, but also wanted to share sort of the mission and the guiding principles with you all that are leading us into this new action plan. So we can go to the next slide. So the vision, when we brought it to the council, our original vision, I think we told you all was sort of long. There were a lot of details and they asked us to make it shorter and snappier. So our vision is pretty simple, pretty straightforward. It's an equitable and just California in which homelessness is rare, brief, and never more than a one-time experience. So we will have time to sort of ask questions about these things as at the end of, after sort of I get through some slides, but if you have anything about these slides as I'm going, feel free to just jump in and ask questions as well. But this is, you know, our vision. It's pretty straightforward, as I said. I think there will be probably some, you know, detail explanation below this, but we just wanted to have a very clear statement from the council, from the secretaries, right, that we're all buying into, that really leads us towards our goals. So on the next slide, we have our guiding principles and commitments. So these may look familiar to you, depending on how much time you have spent with our current action plan. These are currently sort of our key principles and practices, but something that we want to do with our new plan is to not only, you know, say that these things are important, but also provide tools for our council members to use when actually seeking to, you know, live up to these principles and commitments. So, right, by adopting the action plan, we are saying that we all are committing to pursuing racial equity and justice, creating solutions for the full diversity of people experiencing homelessness, seeking and valuing the expertise of people with lived experiences of homelessness, strengthening housing first approaches, balancing crisis response and permanent housing solutions, advancing trauma-informed care and person-centered services, aligning health, housing, and homelessness strategies, and increasing access to resources for California's tribal communities. So really the idea here is that we will be putting some, you know, using these to guide some of our activities and our actions that we're putting in the plan, and, you know, asking that by, or saying that by adopting this action plan, council members are committed to these things, and CalICH will work with them to ensure that these things are happening, right? So a great example is strengthening housing first approaches. ensuring that council member departments and agencies have the resources and the information that they need to actually run their programs in a way that is in line with Housing First, the state's Housing First statute, right? Cal ICH currently provides and will continue to sort of strengthen our work in that area. Reba, I see your hand.
And so a couple of things. I'm beginning to become uncomfortable. And I've been noticing this for quite some time about some language. You know, so at one point, and I'll try to be as brief as I possibly can. One point, I, as a person with lived experience, was a believer that this crisis that we're in could end, that we could actually end this thing. But as time goes on and the numbers continue to climb, and for me, particularly, Black people are still overrepresented. I think that we could, I really want to say should, begin to look at, can we change, you know, homelessness to people that are unhoused, houselessness. Could we begin to look at increasing, when we're talking about equity, can we begin to look at increasing access to resources for Californians, whoever that is disproportionate, beyond our tribal community, that I have the greatest respect for. But if we are going to be honest about the current climate of today, I think that it's really important that we begin to look at the data and really address areas that have been ignored for time over time over time. And I will call it out, Black people across California, not just in the county in which I reside. I'll pin it there.
Thank you, Reba. Yeah, I was smiling because I'm like, did you see my slides before this? Because that's a perfect segue into the data that we have around our goals, where we really have called out African American, Black, and Indigenous communities, right? Within the data. And so one of the things that we will be looking at is to break down all of the data around our goals and understand the disparities that exist within those. So on the next couple slides, I think I will get to your point, but please bring that up again and raise your hand again if it doesn't like fully address what you were thinking about, okay?
Just keep in mind language around words like homelessness. You know, I'm really going to begin to push hard for us not to use that word. It's very demeaning and it is stigmatized.
Okay, that's helpful. Yeah, I would love to have a conversation with you further about like different pieces of language that we should be looking out for as well. Thank you, Reba. So let's go to the next slide. We'll talk about our goals. So we're going to start at a higher level here a little bit because we're going to talk about the goals that we've created for the plan. And I want to start by saying the data for the majority of these goals comes from our HDIS system, right? Our homeless data integration system. So many of you know what that is, but just to zoom out and say, basically, Cal ICH has a data set where we take all the HMIS data from the 44 continuums of care across the state, we combine it, we deduplicate it, and we can report out on service utilization specifically, right? So we have information about projects in a community serving people at risk of or experiencing homelessness. We have data about the people accessing the services in those communities and their housing needs. And we have data on the projects people are enrolled in to receive housing or services. So it's not a perfect system, as we all know. If anyone's worked within their HMIS systems, you know all the complications there. But it is a very important source of information that we can use to really understand our work as a state, as a collective, right? So I just wanted to start by saying that. So it's different from the PIT count. which many folks are probably familiar with, which is just a point in time snapshot, right? On one day, how many people are experiencing homelessness. This is over the course of the whole year, how many people access services, right? So it's inherently going to be a higher number, and we're going to capture more folks who maybe aren't captured on the single day of the pit count. So let's go to the next slide. This is just some baseline measures, right? This is high level from HGIS, right? The number of people accessing services while experiencing homelessness for the fiscal year 22-23 was around 350,000. The number of people experiencing homelessness for the first time was around 180,000. And the number of people exiting to permanent housing in that fiscal year was around 72,000. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but we will send this out so that you have the information as well. But just can give a sense, right, of the type of data we have access to within HGIS. So let's go to the next slide. And here, partially to Reva's point, right, and to something that we want to maintain at the center of our focus, right, there are racial and ethnic disparities within homelessness. So we can see using HGIS, right, the number of Californians accessing services while experiencing homelessness and disaggregate that by race and ethnicity. So out of every 10,000 people in California, 89 access services while experiencing homelessness during fiscal year 22-23. Within the same period, out of every 10,000 Black, African American, or African people in California, 352 access services, right? So you can see that disparity that we are talking about very clearly represented here. You also see disparities with the Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander population, as well as the American Indian, Alaska Native, or Indigenous population. And just calling out, right, that what this means ultimately is that 3.52% of all Black, African American, or African people experienced homelessness in California that year. So just want to like take the time, we have this data center what we're talking about here, right? So we, in our goals, which I'll talk about on the next slide, have really tried to call out the need to do this disaggregation within each of our goals. So now we're going to get to the goals. So if we go to the next slide, there are 6 of these. So I apologize. It will be me like reading them out to you for a little bit. But really just think it's important to be specific, right, as to what we're talking about here. I also will say we are working on like the goal numbers themselves. So really open to thoughts about those. But these are the types of things we are measuring that we think can get us to like a well-rounded set of goals for the state. So the first goal is to create more housing. And this may look familiar to you because it is the goal from HCD's housing plan. So the goal here is plan for the creation of more than 2.5 million homes, with no less than 1 million of those meeting the needs of extremely acutely and low-income households by 2030. And specific inequities to be redressed, right? We have this now within each of these sections that we're going to measure. So we want to look at the racial discrimination and other forms of discrimination experienced by Native American and Black communities within housing markets, the racial inequities and other disparities experienced by those communities served by state-funded housing dollars and units, and the inequitable geographic distribution of affordable housing options. So this comes from, as I said, HCD's housing plan. We really think this gets at sort of the supply sort of level issue of needing more housing across the state in general. So this is our first goal in the plan. So I'll move to goal 2, is reducing the inflow into homelessness. So we want to reduce the ratio of people entering homelessness as compared to those exiting from homelessness each year. We want to look at racial inequities experienced by Native American and Black communities in continuous experiences of homelessness from year to year, risks of homelessness and access to prevention services within those communities, right? Do we have access to prevention resources? And then disparities in housing referrals and permanent housing placements within those communities. And so right now, the data that we have shows, and this is the baseline data, right, for fiscal year 2023, So July 2022 through June 2023, the ratio that we can measure currently in HDIS says that for every 10 people who exited homelessness, about 37 people entered or returned to accessing homelessness services. So this is important because these ratios, different places use them across the state. We thought it was important to include not just people that are entering homelessness newly entering homelessness, but also people returning to accessing homelessness services. Which is why this ratio, I think, is higher than what we would possibly see in other areas that are using a similar ratio. But that will all be explained, in detail in the plan. I think I'm just going to go through these goals, and then I have sort of a summary slide with all 6 of them written so that we can look at all of them together for folks to make comments on. So excuse the long talking portion that I have here, but I'm going to go to the next slide. So goal number 3 is help people leave unsheltered homelessness, right? So increase by a certain percentage the total number of people who leave unsheltered homelessness to either emergency shelter, interim housing, or permanent housing. Right, and we want to look at the overrepresentation of Native American and Black communities among those who are unsheltered, as well as disparities in access to services, interim and permanent housing options, and outcomes achieved for those communities. Last fiscal year, well, I guess it's not last fiscal year anymore, but fiscal year 22-23 data showed that about 93,000 people who were experiencing unsheltered homelessness moved into a sheltered setting. So the goal would be to increase that number by a certain percentage, right, every year, so that we know that we are addressing the needs of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness by actually moving them into shelter, moving them into permanent housing, moving them into a place that is not living outside. So this goal is attempting to, really measure the movement of folks from living outside to living inside. Goal number 4 here is help more people move into housing. So as opposed to leaving unsheltered homelessness, right, it's helping people move specifically into housing. So increase by a certain percentage the total number of people who move into permanent housing, and look at the racial inequities experienced by Native American and Black communities in lengths of time remaining homeless while accessing services. Also looking at disparities in housing referrals and successful permanent housing placements among those communities. And just one thing to lift up here, right? In the data that we have, we can see that 72,000, a little more than 72,000 people exited homelessness and moved into permanent housing in fiscal year 22-23, right? So this reflects, these 2, I think, are really important because they reflect all the work that you all on this call as members of the advisory committee in your roles as local government leaders, as researchers, as advocates, right? This is the system doing its work, right? It's moving people off of the streets, it's moving people into permanent housing. And it's really important, I think, that we have goals that are telling that story as well, that are showing the movement of people in the direction that we want to see happening. We know that there's also lots of, indicators within each of these that we want to measure to understand a little bit more about each one. So we can talk about those if folks have ideas for that. But as high-level goals, this is sort of what we're looking at. So I'll go to the last slide on goals, and then I promise I will let you all ask questions and give comments and talk. So goal number 5 is improving connections to health and social services. So one thing to note about this is that this is really facilitated by the fact that we have HDIS and we are working to connect HDIS with the Health and Human Services Agency data sets. So we can see who is accessing homelessness services that is also accessing healthcare services, right? So this is a big deal for the state to have access to sort of this information. And with it, we'll be able to measure many things, but including, the percent of people who are currently experiencing homelessness who are enrolled in and receiving Medi-Cal and CalWORKs, right? So we want to know that the folks who are experiencing homelessness, who are accessing homelessness services, are also able to access the other benefits that they should be accessing, such as Medi-Cal and CalWORKs. And so that's something we want to measure. And we also, again, want to look at the disparities experienced by Native American and Black communities in access to these healthcare and social services. So we're working on getting baseline data for that, don't have that quite yet. But just want to flag that this is via our data sharing with our HHS partners. And last but not least, our sort of goal of making homelessness one time, right, is ensuring people do not become homeless again. So we want to make sure that at least a certain percentage of people who move into permanent housing do not become homeless again. And we want to look at inequities and returns to homelessness for Native American and Black communities. And just as our baseline data here, right, something that we know is that 91% of people in fiscal year 22-23 who moved into permanent housing did not return to homelessness or to receiving homeless services within 6 months. So that's a baseline percentage we can use and say, okay, we want to continue improving that percentage as much as possible. So with that, let's go to the next slide. And I think this slide should have all of the goals here. And so now I want to throw it to you all. I really want to hear any questions you have about these goals specifically, or the vision or the guiding principles, right? This is really what's guiding our plan, what's guiding our conversation with departments. We want them to be creating activities for the plan that are really moving towards these goals. They've seen these goals, right? They've talked them through, etc. So really interested in your thoughts about these, as well as any thoughts about, what does it take for the state to successfully support our local partners in meeting these goals, right? Because all this data is coming from HMIS systems, right? What we're measuring is inherently local. And so the success of our local partners is the success of the state in moving these goals forward. So open to any thoughts about any of those pieces. So with that, I will stop talking. And if advisory committee members have comments or thoughts, please raise your hands and I will call on you. And one thing I forgot to mention too here, I'm sorry, it was in my notes and I neglected to mention it. Just want to call out that we understand the data that we have specifically on Native American and Indigenous communities is, we think, of like a severe undercount. We know that the data collection in those communities is not sufficient and doesn't really capture the needs. So you can think about those disparities we showed you earlier. If that community is already seeing a disparity in the data we do have, and that's an undercount, right, we would expect to see an even higher disparity. So just want to call that out. All right, I'm seeing some hands. Reba.
Yeah, so I have a lot of questions, but I'm only going to ask one in hopes that those who are providing services are connected to the HMIS system will be able to respond to that in their comment. So my question around slide 13 in HMIS is, how accurate is the input that creates this data? And are all the systems across the counties the same? Because I believe that there are people who are inputting this information. And so then the question becomes, how much are they putting in? Is it fair? Is it equitable in itself? So I'll stop there.
That is a really good question, Reba. And I would love for someone on this call who's in the advisory committee to unmute. If you're someone who uses HMIS or inputs data into HMIS or has a lot of experience with it, would love to hear your thoughts on that question.
I'm happy to help. Reba, can you repeat the question?
The question is, how accurate is the input that creates the data? Keeping in mind that there are people who are inputting this information, and are all the systems across the county, across the state, the same?
So, the information is only as accurate as what the person is receiving. Most of the, because it is all self-reported, but also there's typically in every community that I've worked in, there's the HMIS administrator does routine audits and will catch mistakes made in any data entry. So something that doesn't match up or doesn't make sense, they will catch it and have folks go back and confirm that it's accurate. That's typically done by the HMIS administrator. And then no, the systems are not identical across the state. People use different software providers. And I think there's 3 of them, available, 3 to 5 of them available in the country that will host the software. It's like 3 different kinds of software. So it looks a little different across the board, but the data itself that's collected is the same. They're just not identical systems, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Jody. And I will say, I think, oh, sorry. Yeah, I think to your point, Reba, something that you're getting at too, is like, if we're gonna tie our success as a state to these systems, we also need to support these systems in doing the best work that they can and provide resources to ensure that folks are able to input the data accurately, right? I think one thing that I can speak to in our work is that Cal ICH is working with our local partners in many cases. When we are looking at the data and we see something confusing, right? Our research team and our database team are working with local partners to understand what we're seeing. But I think, part of the reason I started the conversation with what does HGIS capture is if you're experiencing, if you don't have a house, right? If you're living outside and you're not accessing services, you're not in this system. So we don't have that here. And that I think is something that we don't necessarily have a fix for, but it's something that we need to be clear about when talking about these numbers, right? We can't say these numbers are truth, but we can say this is the information we have and these are its potential, drawbacks. Thank you, Reba. Mariah, I see your hand.
Thank you, Cody. Mariah with Northern Circle Indian Housing Authority. I just wanted to make a few comments. Seeing the inclusion of Native American populations in this information is really inspiring, because that means we're doing a good job as advocates to move and push and ensure that our membership is accurately represented and actually have equitable opportunities to receive services. There's a huge misconception that every tribe is a gaming tribe and every gaming tribe has this overflow of money to support their membership, and that's so not true. Even within the state of California, in order to receive funds, it took until really the passing of AB 1010 to receive funds through HCD. So although we've been considered experienced developers in tribal arenas and tribal communities, by many means, we weren't even allowed to receive funding and carry out housing development. So really excited to see the needle move on this. I'm also eager to support the efforts in ensuring that the data actually represents Native American needs. Point in time counts do not go on reservations and count the homelessness experience in tribal communities. I want to applaud Mendocino County for actually conducting a point in time count on tribal lands, but really excited to move this forward. Thank you, Cody.
Thanks, Mariah, appreciate it. And I'm seeing some comments in the chat, the HMIS is definitely the main data system, but there are some funders who require their own data system entry, so it might not be all encompassing. That's a great flag as well, thank you. Javon?
Thank you, Cody, for the presentation. Really want to highlight the opportunity to add to those principles and goals, which is to bolster unhoused youth infrastructure for unaccompanied and system-involved youth. The data in HDIS is 16,947 unaccompanied youth identified, with 70,000 plus in families with children. And we know that when there are children involved in experiencing homelessness, their risk of experiencing homelessness later in future goes up. So we have a population and generations that are impacted by homelessness. And the Black community is at the top, and appreciate that that is being elevated. And with that, when it comes to the systems, you got education, you got juvenile justice, you have foster care. And I pause on that because when I say foster care, you have young people leaving out of care into homelessness. Though the data may not necessarily be there in totality, we know that it's happening. And with all of the advancements under Medi-Cal, our health care system, both physical and behavioral health, impacts homelessness as well when people are going through that system. So elevating again, when it comes to goals and things of that nature, bolstering a unhoused youth infrastructure for unaccompanied and system-involved youth. Please lift that up as high as it can, because I won't stop talking about it.
Thank you. And we don't want you to stop talking about it. Thank you, Javon. And I will say one thing that I didn't mention before is that, not to give our research team too many reports to write, but within HMIS or HGIS, right, we have access to whatever demographic data is input in the HMIS system. So for each of these goals that are using HMIS, we can say, okay, let's look at this by age. Let's look at this by race, ethnicity. Let's look at this by gender, right? So we can do some deeper dives into, let's look at how these goals look differently for youth and young adults, right? And let's consider that. So definitely just adding that in there. But I hear you too, Javon. Sharon?
Thanks, Cody, and I really appreciate these goals. I mean, I'm, excited to see trying to get specific around the goals and really think this is incredibly important work. So thank you for sharing this and thinking it through. I do have some questions about the reducing inflow into homelessness and improving connections to health and social services. I do think that the number of people falling into homelessness versus the number of people getting housed is really important data. And I think it's really important for Cal ICH to share that, because I think there's great misunderstanding of why our homeless numbers overall keep going up despite state and other investment. So I think that that would be really good to put out there. I don't really think that it makes sense to say, that, and I'm not sure this is what you were saying, but this is kind of what I heard from your presentation, Cody, was like, have like more investment in prevention than in moving people into permanent housing from homelessness. So I just caution about that, because the homeless system cannot be the only entity trying to prevent homelessness. And I do think it's, and I think that that's well understood, that it is kind of like, Alex has used this analogy before, and I think it fits well, that it's like asking the emergency room to prevent people from getting sick or from having emergency medical treatment. It is not really, intended to be that, and it can't be that to everybody. I mean, we just don't have enough resources within the homeless response system to do that. But I think it's also important to include in the goals really having, specific responses from other systems that are discharging people into homelessness, particularly those systems that also have really disproportionate rates of Black and Indigenous populations. And an example is our justice system, child welfare system, and healthcare systems. All three of those systems have disproportionately high rates of people accessing those systems for, sometimes that leading to disproportionate numbers of people falling into homelessness directly from those systems. So I guess I would just say it would be really good to add that nuance to the reducing inflow into homelessness. And if there are data I don't know if there are data that can be accessed there, but highlighting data that can be accessed and setting goals around the number of people coming directly from those systems into homelessness. And similarly, improving connections to health and social services. I do think in a couple of other states, there are really good examples of data matches between a state, data warehouses or data integration systems and Medicaid systems, social services systems, to just like do that data linkage and determine how many populations or how many people are also on Medicaid who are experiencing homelessness or are in the child welfare system and experiencing homelessness. So I do think that might be really helpful too in that improving connections category.
Yeah, thank you for those notes, Sharon. One thing I will say just in response is the reducing inflow, that's goal number 2. The reason it says exploring there actually is because we're still figuring out how to talk about it exactly, because that ratio, we know it can be a little confusing. The idea is not to say prioritize prevention, like the inflow over exits, right? The idea is really to say, like, we want to reduce that ratio by both preventing people from experiencing homelessness and increasing the number of people that are exiting each year. Trying to figure out how to speak to that, but definitely not saying like prevention is like more important than these other aspects.
Right. I appreciate that. I wasn't sure, so that's why I was not sure whether you're going there.
Totally.
But I think maybe one way to characterize it is by saying the reason why it's so hard to get ahead of or decrease the number of people experiencing homelessness is because of this, huge number of people falling in every year in California. So I do think that is really relevant, and to say, that maybe just to mention that it's important to work with other systems as well as affordable housing, production to make sure that people who are at greatest risk of homelessness are basically that there are some other systems responding to that. And that, again, the homeless response is not meant to be, nor could it ever be, the only prevention, system. So I guess it would maybe just be helpful to frame it in that way.
Cool. Thank you. Charlene, I see your hand.
Yes, hi, thank you, Cody. So just, excellent work on the core elements of these action plans. Captured all of the information very nicely and succinctly. And I just wanted to say, not the rate of 91% of unhoused going into permanent supportive housing, that's great success and great stride. So I just want to call that out, that, many of the things that many of us are doing is working, and bring attention to that 9% that have returned back to being unsheltered. Is, do we have an understanding of why that is occurring, so that we can also reduce those numbers? But before we can work on reducing those numbers, is having an understanding of why they're returning to becoming unsheltered. And then my third comment was the importance of improving connections to health and social services. We do TAY housing, and absolutely, know how important it is to wrap around these comprehensive supportive health and behavioral health care services for our population, because there's a lot of trauma involved and mental health, and they need a tremendous amount of support. But we have to keep in mind that right now, the California healthcare system is in crisis. And, hospitals are closing, emergency rooms are overcrowded, people are having difficulty scheduling appointments and being seen by healthcare and behavioral healthcare services. And many of you know that Proposition 35 is going to be on the ballot to hopefully help address and further enhance the healthcare system. because that is also one of the reasons why we're having some of those challenges with connecting our unhoused to these important health and social services.
Yeah. I do want to, echo your comment that like goals are helpful for this community, but we're wanting to move it also and showing more things happening, so I just want to lift that.
Whoever is talking, we can't, I don't think it's just me. We can't understand what is being said.
Oh,
Yeah,
no.
Cody, you're coming across kind of echoey,
Garbled. It's a bit
Yeah.
garbled.
garbled, yeah.
How about now?
Much better.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. My audio has been an issue all week for me, so apologies. But yeah, Charlene, I was just saying, the goals are intended to help us, steer and know what direction we're moving in and know where we need to be focusing our energy. But also, I think your point of, that 91% number deserves to be celebrated. It really deserves to be lifted up and shown that, support permanent housing is the solution to homelessness, housing and services, right? And so I think whatever, and then saying, okay, what's not working for those 9%? Like, let's dig into that. Where is it a certain location? Is it a certain type of housing, right? Like trying to understand, using the data to understand. So the more we talk about this, the more I think our research teams heads roll, because I'm like, there's so many questions to be answered using this data, and so there's a lot to dig into, but I do think it's a good start for sure. So thank you for saying that.
And just that if we're having difficulty improving the connections of the unhoused to health and social services, we need to understand why. And that is the healthcare system being in crises right now in California. It's, and how can we support in moving that change as well?
Yep. Thank you. Okay, Ludmilla.
Yeah, Ludmilla here. First of all, thank you so much for this presentation. The way you put it together is like makes the information clear, it's legible, just it's understandable. And I know different people have different, information processing kind of things, but I'm going, oh, okay, I see, So thank you for the work that you did on this. The big thing I want to ask about this is that these the percentages and of different things on the breaking down does not appear on the document that was attached to our packet, and I would love to see that, because pairing the information, the breakdown with the percentages you're getting on the results and stuff like that in a printed form that I could share with other people and review myself would be super helpful. I'm not sure how or when that could come out, but just the stuff you have in the slides. Anyways, I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, we will get that too. Apologies, but the slides will come to you as well. So we'll try to get both documents available for you.
But yeah, if just the conciseness of that all in one document and being able to compare things is just a beautiful thing. I got to tell you, for all of you that put that together. One particular couple of points that one is like, if there could be a breakdown on like kind of the inflow to homelessness versus the return to homelessness on that one where you had it all grouped into one number, but just split that up maybe. There's some numbers where you've got like a percentage, or if you could just kind of make a one-line statement of the total number, like for example, total number of people experiencing homelessness, 10% out of 10, just saying the total number, that and put that in there too, just so I can compare. That would make it a little more easy to understand what kind of number of people are we talking about, not just the percentage, but just a one-line thing, because I don't want to make this a 20-page document. One thing I just want to lift up on in number 5 here on improving the connections to health and social services. I mean, I totally get that, having more affordable housing and having permanent supported housing is, a big, essential, obvious piece of what we're all doing here, and it's where a lot of the money is going. But I'm gonna say, really, I'm just looking at if there's any way to have kind of numbers of people going to drop-in centers, enrolling at drop-in centers, connecting with social services, other community connections, anything where people are actually hospital services. I don't know how we could track that data efficiently, but in not just the number of people who are receiving benefits, but the people who are showing up at places that are giving additional services that are helping. And the reason I'm interested in it is because there's some really vital, very essential, helpful things that are occurring in the communities. And I don't want those to get just pushed by the wayside. If we kind of lift that up as far as that the numbers, even if imperfect, the numbers would be tracking. I mean, maybe if we can't even track homeless people like low income and homeless people, for example, attending that, you'd be capturing some numbers of people who are getting beneficial services, and that are going to reduce the depth of their homelessness, basically, and will help them to connect more. I'm sorry, I'm kind of getting a little into the weeds of trying to explain this. But just rather than just having the access to benefits, just tracking the people who have accessed services in these different areas that are supplementary, that complement homeless services directly. That'd be wonderful.
Yeah,
Thank
I think
you.
that makes sense, Ludmilla. I think, as I said, something that we're gonna think about is like within each of these these are the high level goals, right? Within each of these, there's more questions we would want to ask. So I think you're totally right on. Like within number 5 here, we would love to be able to access information about the specific types of interventions or types of social services people are accessing, like you mentioned. I think, of course, it depends on what data is available, but this is sort of our first foray with HGIS into that sort of data connection, right? So I think we're going to see how that goes and see what data is available with these connections, and then we can sort of take as much information out of that as possible and then say, okay, we don't have information on drop-in centers. Is that something we could get? How could we get it, etc. But I definitely appreciate the direction of that comment.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you.
And ultimately, of course, we'd all like to see what's working. There may be something that's a low-cost program that is really helping people have realizations about life or connect more or get more jobs. I mean, obviously CalWorks is one of those, but anyway, thank you.
No, thanks, Ludmilla. Okay, I see Alex's hand next.
Yeah, thanks, Cody. Well, first, I appreciate Sharon crediting me with that witticism earlier, but that actually came from Deputy Secretary Wickrama. So as most wise things do. So I want to put the credit there for that saying. Hugely appreciative of these goals. You can't make progress until you have a plan to make progress. And these goals are really an essential part of it. And no, it's not always easy to come out with goals, right? There's political vulnerabilities in doing this, and you're kind of making a leap of faith. So just want to really deeply appreciate Cal ICH for doing that. I think, in looking at these goals, to me, the next step in how do we ensure our local jurisdictions can actually make progress on these goals. Well, one is, of course, like ongoing stable sources of funding, but I feel like I say that so much that it may as well be tattooed to my head. But I think it's also like putting out what are the system models that get us there, right? Like what's the right balance of resources? How do you stitch your resources together to ensure that you're, increasing your placements into permanent housing, to ensure that you're, increasing your enrollments in Medi-Cal and CalWorks, et cetera. So that probably is a ways off, but I think continuing to lift up those models for local jurisdictions, which I will say, while I'm saying that makes it frustrating sometimes to not be able to talk about what are the things the state is doing that are pushing us away from some of those best practices, from some of those good system practices. And so just want to again express that I think this advisory committee is a great place to talk about those things. And a webinar that we've heard about 2 days earlier is not necessarily always going to, I think, satisfy that need for fulsome conversation. But mostly, you know, just want to express appreciation for these goals and the hard work that went into them.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it. Megan, I see your hand.
Hi, thanks for a moment of your time here. I appreciate the clarity of these goals and the kind of simplicity of the language around it. The one goal that's sticking out to me immediately was like, how are you going to do that? And why are you doing that? Is goal number 5. My work overlaps quite a bit with CalFresh and Medi-Cal outreach and eligibility, as well as CalWORKs. So in looking at this goal, the first thing I thought is, first of all, in my experience, the vast majority of people that are experiencing homelessness are enrolled in Medi-Cal. So it didn't feel to me like, gosh, that's really a problem. That hasn't been for me at all what we've noticed as a problem. But that being said, the data systems do not match well. And if you're looking at HMIS data and seeing a number of people who are not reflecting Medi-Cal enrollments in their data, it's probably because the person who inputted that data didn't ask that question. And so I just question whether your baseline data is going to be a value or accurate. I do think that there's policy change around this issue that could be much more compelling. If there was a policy change around Medi-Cal, that if a person experiencing homelessness applied for Medi-Cal, at the moment of application, if they're approved, they could have a 3-year eligibility window rather than a 1-year eligibility window, could make a huge difference. Because of the issue around Medi-Cal enrollment with homeless individuals is that they're not in the same place when they get mailed their renewal packet. A 3-year eligibility window would make a ton of sense, would be easy to implement, and would make a big difference. I likewise, a small population of people are eligible for CalWORKs, and very few of those people are experiencing HUD level definitions of homelessness. So CalWORKs is only people with children are eligible for CalWORKs. As we know, households with children are usually experiencing homelessness or often in other definition categories. So that quest also feels a little questionable to me in terms of a really important goal. But I do think, again, there's some policy changes that could be made around CalWORKs that would make a real big difference to people experiencing homelessness, particularly when your children are removed from your care, you lose access to CalWORKs. Often that's your money that's paying for your rent. And so it plunges people into homelessness right at the moment that they need to do a lot of things in order to get their kids back into their household. A simple change in CalWORKs policy that would allow another 6 months or a year of CalWORKs eligibility if your kids are removed from your home would enable that household to retain their housing so that they don't fall into homelessness and then not have the ability to have the children return to their home. So I would encourage, if you're going to stick with number 5, to look at policy changes that could make a difference rather than tracking data that I'm really, really questioning you're going to find an accurate way to track that data.
Okay, so I'm laughing a little bit, Megan, because I was trying to write down everything you were saying, and then I was like, oh wait, this is going to be recorded, so it's fine. I can just listen to it later. So anyway, those are great ideas. I think that, so just one clarification on number 5. So one thing we are working on now is actually so we're not using the healthcare information in HMIS. We're connecting HMIS with the health systems, like with the Medi-Cal and CalWORKs databases, so that we can match people and understand, or match information about folks and understand, who's showing up in both systems, right? I think still the point about like, is the data accurate and how representative is it, I think is still to be seen because we haven't done that work yet. I think so I am intrigued about the question about like, is it even a problem, right? Are people receiving these benefits in a way that is sufficient? I think that would be an interesting conversation to continue having. Because if there are things if that doesn't seem like a problem to folks and like, actually we're like, yeah, this is fine. We don't need a goal around it, right? There might be other things we could measure, but I've heard that was something that was sort of like of interest in the HHS
I-
realm.
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak from my experience and, you know, we do a
Sure.
lot of data tracking and very, very few of the homeless individuals we interact with are not enrolled in Medi-Cal. That might not be true for people that are real transient, like really moving across counties a lot, but the homeless individuals that are kind of in the community, typically in my community, are enrolled in Medi-Cal. I do think a 3-year eligibility window or I'm using the wrong phrase, like a 3-year
Yeah.
enrollment period could make a huge difference. But again, typically when you are homeless, you don't have a lot of assets, you don't have a lot of resources. So enrolling in Medi-Cal in the county office is not that hard because you just
Yeah.
don't have a complicated household to get through the process.
Yeah. So I think we'll know more about all this once we can see the data a little bit better. But I will say, right, like if these are our goals and you all have really specific, like I think this is a really good avenue for the advisory committee to be saying like, okay, what does it take to actually reach these goals, right, Megan? Like you're saying, like there are really specific policy changes that we should be looking at. If you want to do number 5, here are the avenues
You know,
through which
what appeals to me about a policy change is it doesn't require any work on our part. You could just make the policy change at the state level. It would just take somebody to pass a bill saying this. They do, you know, larger time span of, you know, enrollment eligibility for all kinds of populations. This would not be hard and it would make a big difference. And we wouldn't have to do anything.
Totally. I hear that. Okay, yeah, thank you. But yeah, I think that's a good example of like the type of work once these goals are sort of in place and finalized, right? That we would love to keep working with you all on is like, okay, we have these, like, Megan, tell us again, what was that specific policy, right? Like, let's figure out how do we work on those things. So thank you for that. Okay, Phil, you've been waiting patiently with your hand up. Thank you. Uh-oh, hopefully you weren't too patient. Phil, I see your hand up, but you are still muted. Let me know if you might just, oh,
Cody,
yeah.
I think it went mute because I was complimenting you, and your sense of modesty precludes so many compliments on one call. But I did want to add my voice to others who are complimenting you on putting all of this together and giving a template, I think, for our thinking moving into the future. The question I had was, I'd like you to unpack the exits to permanent housing. It seems like an extraordinary number, given what I know from other places around the country. And I know California providers, of course, are the best ever. But I'm wondering, is that number of households or the number of literally people?
That is a good question. So thank you again to everyone who has been appreciative of this work. I will say, I cannot take all the credit or, you know, even the plurality of the credit for this. This is a super huge group effort with all of our CalICH staff and partners. But I appreciate that folks feel like this is moving in the right direction. That's really huge for us. And to your question on the permanent housing, so I am running up against my full knowledge of all the details about this. But I will say, I believe this is number of individuals, not households, who moved into permanent housing. And I believe, I can't exactly remember what we put in the permanent housing category, but I can get you the details and maybe we can include that in like the notes in this PowerPoint when we send it out. I'm getting a message from my research team that I did get that right. It is individuals, not households. So
is it also true then that the number of people who have been engaged at 349,000, that
yes,
includes every person, it's not households?
That is individuals as well, yeah.
So what your numbers tell us is that 20% of all those who access services go into housing in a year, which again is very extraordinary in terms of national numbers. I'm wondering then, from your research team, maybe they can indicate, does that include all time-limited subsidies and rapid rehousing and self-resolve exits? Are all of those included in that number of out to permanent housing?
I will follow up on that and I can get back to you all. I can maybe put something in the chat. I can have someone write a little explanation of what goes into that. I do believe it includes things like time limited subsidies. I think it's an exit to any permanent destination. So I can get the details of what specific destinations that would include. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the concern would be, certainly among researchers, the concern would be that there's a certain level of unreliability in terms of numbers associated with self-resolved exits to permanent housing. So I think that's a concern. And certainly the idea that 20% of all those accessing services, whether they're households or individuals, have now gone out into permanent housing. I think that is a number worth looking at. My understanding is in the AHAR that, for example, Los Angeles, I think the number was somewhere around 15,000. So 70,000 seems very high, and it certainly seems very high compared to national numbers. I believe the final AHAR will be out in the not too distant future, and comparing this number against what the AHAR nationally is saying would be important. All of that to say, if we're saying 73,000 and there's some anomaly in that, raising that number, one of our objectives is to get that number higher. We may be setting a very difficult goal if that's actually an inflated number. So I would just have concerns about that and would be happy to talk to your research team about those concerns.
Yeah, we would love that for sure. And I will say, I think one of the things that you're calling out here that's important for us, right, is in the sort of more detailed reporting on these goals, right? It will be important to report, sort of disaggregate this number by exit destination, right? So saying what is it included, or what does it include, so that you can actually do those comparisons across location. So yeah, definitely hear that. And thank you for the offer to speak with us. I'm sure our team would be happy to do that.
I'd be happy to do that. And again, my compliments on the direction that you're all going. Let's not undermine ourselves by giving numbers that may be inflated and unreplicable.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, by the way, I'm present. I don't think you heard me earlier. It was kind of mumbled, but I did say here.
Perfect. We got you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have about 5 minutes left for this agenda item, so I'm gonna just call on Reba and then we'll go to Vitka to finish us out here.
I too want to say thank you for this presentation today. There's a few things in looking at these goals that I believe are missing, and they're critical. But I also want to uplift that goals, in order to achieve goals, that we have to do some planning and, in order to make this happen. So what's missing? So when I look at between 3 and 6, the empowerment, what about the people? So we're looking at changing some numbers or some, as to what we're seeing outside, if you will. But in order to achieve these goals successfully, I kind of like that word, success, achieving these goals. I believe that we have to start looking at empowerment. How are we empowering the people not to return back again? How are we empowering folks, in order to remain or even to connect to health and social services? And do we want people to languish there? Should we not be looking at how folks are using something temporarily? There's a line that in the beginning, in Equitable and Just California, in which your words were, homelessness are brief and one-time experience. Well, that's the same way I see even some of these social services. And the reason I'm saying that is because we have to begin to look at when one comes inside, whatever that inside is, that there is an opportunity to empower that person in that moment. that there is an opportunity to teach and reach an individual to begin to learn again how to use a broom and a mop, how to shop for groceries, how to get along in the community in which they're in by way of shelter, interim, whatever this temporary space is. So that when you do officially move into your permanent place, that you are able to sustain it, but you also have learned some skills of how to get along with the neighbors around you. And so there's a lot that's missing here. And it seems like it's so high level, these high level goals that really are not touching the individuals. It sounds more like your hopes of what the, California may want. And it is to be appreciated. But at the same time, we really need to drill into how this is going to change the lives of the people that you're speaking of in the first place. Help more people leave the unsheltered, come on. And then what? What are we offering? And I would love to know across California, because I am only, and let me be very, very transparent here, I am only familiar with what's happening here in Los Angeles. But I would love to know if there are, what does services look across the 58 counties? How are people being served? Is there empowerment? Are we really helping people to grow so that they can do more and go further? Because that should be the ultimate goal. I'll stop there.
No,
And
I
also, just so
appreciate
you know, if I disappear, it's because I have to, about 2:35 or so. So I don't want to just seem, I don't want to be rude.
You're good. Thank you, Reba. No, and I just want to acknowledge this is not the first time you have brought up, like, how do we define success, right? I think you said that in a prior conversation, and we've been thinking about that, and I'm glad you bring it up again. I don't necessarily know that I have the answers. Would love to talk more with you and anyone who's interested on this call about, like, how do you get to those sort of, like, these are sort of inherently high level goals, right? And how do we drill down to the details of, like, the nuance of that experience of being in these services and in these programs? So I will put a pin in that for now, and we will circle back to you on it, come back to you to talk more, because I think that's something we are going to need to explore when we're, reporting out on these numbers, and, when the numbers are really representing the experiences of individuals, right? So thank you, Reba. And I see Vitka's hand.
Hi, I wanted to just add a little more context to item. Sorry, I don't want to do the echo. To item number 5, regarding just what Megan was discussing. What Megan was talking about regarding Medi-Cal enrollment. The real challenge, at least in the universe I live in, which is in behavioral health, real challenge is the population of people who are experiencing homelessness, who are transient and who are enrolled in Medi-Cal. They are enrolled in Medi-Cal in one county and show up for care or service as a person experiencing homelessness in a different county. And it is the transition and the ability to immediately access services in the county where they showed up for care, healthcare, or what have you. That is a specific and unique problem, and it is specific to not the health system, but it's actually a specific to kind of the social service enrollment system. And so it may be, as Megan said, less of an issue of making sure that people have Medi-Cal, although I'm sure there are folks who do not. But there are definite, like, problems in the system with helping people connect to healthcare via Medi-Cal once they have, like, moved or have relocated to a different county. And I think in order to make a difference, it's not just about increasing the enrollment. There has to be some kind of systems fix, process fix that allows them to immediately access care, and that not be an obstacle. It's because, oh, you can't receive care in this county because we have you can't receive care in Los Angeles County because we have you enrolled in Alameda County. And so those things are like super problematic for people. And I would say the final thing I'll say is, regarding regarding item number 3, which seems to me so incredibly pertinent and relevant to the issue of the resolution and the grants passed decision, is that I think there's significant problems with what emergency shelter and interim housing looks like for people, and for the people who are unsheltered and living either on Caltrans land or county land or public spaces. I think there's questions to ask about where are the places where people are being offered to go. And I think Reba's I so appreciated, Reba, your op-ed in the in Cal Matters, because I think it sort of spoke to the heart of that.
Thanks, Vika. I appreciate that. And I know we're running low on time, but Al, we'll take you as the last hand on this one, and then we'll keep moving.
Okay. Hey, thank you, Cody. My question is probably maybe put it on the agenda for a later time, but coming back to the issue of creating more housing, the plan for the creation of more than 2.5 million homes, I think it'd be good at least a high level to provide some education here as to how that's going to get done. Are we talking about, that's got to be mostly private sector investments, I would think, that is doing this, but I think providing us with some education around how that actually gets implemented would be helpful. And then maybe perhaps even breaking down that 2.5 million homes being created into some type of a sense of which parts of the state are you looking to do that. I just think, because we get asked all the time, how does this get developed? I think from a super high level, it'd be nice to know. I'm pretty sure it's your Department of Economic, it's more economic development with some of these private investors, I would think, but it'd be good to know this, Cody.
Yeah, thank you, Al. I appreciate that. I think we are working with HCD, Department of Housing and Community Development, to sort of understand what goes into that goal and the measurement of that. So we will hopefully include more information on that goal and sort of be able to break it down by, income level and whatnot. But definitely a good flag that we need some more information about that goal specifically. Also, oh yeah, it says it here. I wasn't sure if it was included, but just flagging the no less than 1 million, of these homes meeting the needs of lower income households by 2030. And we should be able to measure as well, within the low income bucket, right? How much housing is available to each of the different, categories of folks. So that's something that we're looking at to start, at least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Al. Okay, well, thank you all. I know this was a lot of information. I really appreciate your all's participation and your thoughtfulness around this. If things come up after this that you think of and you didn't get to say, please follow up with us. We're continuing to work on this, continuing to work with the council, and we will bring the more progress on our action plan back to you at your next meeting. So really appreciate all the feedback and the input. So I know I'm running a little bit behind, so I'm going to keep us moving to our next agenda item. So we went through the discussion already, so perfect. So I'm going to talk super briefly, and then I'm passing it to someone else, so you don't have to keep listening to me. But we have one of the co-chairs of our state funding and programs working group here, Sarah Post, who works at HCD. And she is here and is going to share a little bit about a project that we're working on that is in direct response to some of the recommendations that you all made as an advisory committee to the council. So on the next slide, I'll just remind us sort of what we're doing here, how we got here. So in late 2022, Cali CH members, expressed interest in hearing from you all about how to best coordinate our state funding and programs. You all created an initial set of recommendations to the council in a memo that was sent to them. Then Cali CH staff, sort of in response to those recommendations, created a series of sort of proposed action steps to help implement those recommendations. So how do we take your recommendations and make them into reality as much as we can? So on the next slide, we will focus in on one of the recommendations that you provided, right? Which we have here is saying the council should pursue actions to reduce administrative burden for applicants. I think there were actually a few recommendations you had around administrative burden, right? And understanding like what the requirements of these programs are and the reporting requirements and et cetera, and trying to reduce the, duplicative nature or sometimes conflicting nature of these programs. And so the action step that we put forth is that we requested that the council requested the state funding and programs working group create recommendations on standard funding application questions, reporting requirements, outcomes, and definitions to help unify state funding applications as much as possible. So to that end, we are starting work on a project to do just that. And to kick us off and talking about that and sort of sharing about what we're working on, I will see if Sarah is here and can
I'm
unmute.
here.
Great. Hi, Sarah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
Great. So I'll pass it to you and I think we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, thanks, Cody and Josh. And hello to the advisory committee. Thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Sarah Poss, and I'm the unit chief for policy and program support in our Housing Policy Development Division at the Department of Housing and Community Development. So hopefully I've still got your attention. That was a big mouthful. But HCD is one of the 3 co-chairs of the State Funding and Programs Working Group. So Cody and I are 2 of the co-chairs, and then our 3rd co-chair is a representative from the Department of Social Services who's getting over an illness, and so she couldn't be here today, and here I am. So just a little bit of background on the State Funding and Programs Working Group, which I might refer to as SFP during this presentation because I'm going to say the name a lot. But this working group is comprised of state staff from across the agencies and departments that administer housing and homelessness funding and programs. And it includes a representative from, I think, every single council member organization. So this slide captures some of our charter activities that are relevant to this particular project that we're here to talk to you about today. But it doesn't capture all of the activity that the State Funding and Programs Working Group is charged with. But some of the items that we are responsible for, that we're responsible for that are here on this slide are identifying opportunities for streamlining the deployment of state funding, creating clearer standards for the housing and services interventions to be supported by state funding and programs, and assessing and addressing challenges that smaller communities face in securing and implementing state funding. Next slide, Josh. Great. So what problem are we solving for with this project? So as you might remember, the advisory committee wrote up a series of recommended action steps a few months ago. And this really helped us decide that we wanted to undertake this particular project as our next project in the State Funding and Programs Working Group. So the state administers multiple funding programs related to housing and homelessness, and they all have slightly different requirements. And we've all heard anecdotally from the advisory committee and also from our own grantees that grantees feel administratively burdened by complex, numerous, and differing reporting requirements, insufficient amounts of administrative allocation to properly execute programs, and differing definitions of target population encampments, other types of terms that we have to use in our state funding programs. So the goal of this project is to really move on the advisory committee's proposed action step. So we are proposing taking on a project to analyze the different elements of our state funding programs and make recommendations. Great, yeah, I think we're on the right slide. And make recommendations to how we might be able to reduce those barriers to the council for council deliberation. We can go to the next slide, Josh. Slide 6 on our deck, but I think it might be different for yours. Okay. So potential project scope. So the State Funding and Programs Working Group has proposed several elements, which we're kind of calling data elements for this project, but they are parts of funding applications and monitoring requirements that are pretty standard for a lot of our state funding programs. And those are timelines, so like funding release date, expenditure, obligation, deadlines, eligible activities, definitions again, and then who is an eligible participant for each program, auditing, scheduling, and cycle if there is one, demographic data collection, target population, eligible applicants, reporting timelines and requirements, and administrative percentage and outcome goals, or however it is that the program is measuring their success. Next slide, Josh. So we were conscious in the State Funding and Programs Working Group that this project really has the potential to balloon into a huge unmanageable project because there's a lot of different programs. There's a lot of different things we could be looking at. So that's why we're really trying to hone in on what are the data elements that we want to look at and what programs should we include in this project. We're starting this project by selecting only a few programs with the potential to expand our assessment after those initial few programs, or we may find that the recommendations that come out of this project just easily apply to all of the other funding programs. So this is kind of exploratory. So the first list that we're going to use, we're trying to utilize existing resources and not reinvent the wheel on things that we don't need to reinvent the wheel for. And so when we met in our working group on August 6th, we proposed 2 existing lists of council member department programs that are related to housing and homelessness that we could look at to decide which programs we want to include in this project. And so the first place that we're going to look at is the 2024 Cal ICH Housing First surveys. And these were used, this is a set of surveys that were sent to council member departments by Cal ICH staff to assess Housing First implementation in applicable programs. And it includes 38 programs across 9 departments. So again, being selective here, we're not going to be looking at every single one of these programs, but we're going to consult that list. And then we're also going to look at the Guide to Strategic Uses of State and Federal Funds to Prevent and End Homelessness, which we also refer to as the Strategic Funding Guide, because that's a really long name. But this is a Cal ICH guide intended to help people with lived experience, advocates, policymakers, and leaders from local government, tribal nations, continuums of care, to understand and make strategic use of the many different state and federal resources available to prevent and end homelessness. And then finally, we're suggesting that we prioritize programs for this project based on total funding amount and number of grantees. So I think we're trying to really, we're trying to look at the biggest programs first, because we think that we may get some really valuable insight from programs that have many, many grantees that we could glean feedback from. Next slide, Josh. Okay, thanks. Or Cody, I'm not sure who's running the slides. So just to give you an idea of our project milestones, a lot of these are tentative. You'll see, we're still in this kind of scoping phase of the project. And we're hoping that we can deliver on a lot of these milestones sooner than what we've written here. But here we are in August 2024. We're soliciting feedback from you all as the advisory committee on our project scope. Next month, we will be identifying the state funding programs that will be included in the project, and we're going to finalize other elements of the project scope and what data elements we want to look at in the project. In October, we will discuss a draft survey. That's how we are intending to collect information on the various funding programs, is to use our contacts within the council member departments and agencies. We will send each program manager or representative a survey to answer for their respective programs on the key data elements that we're looking to collect information on. So Josh has helped us draft a first draft of that survey. We plan to send it out in October. And we have a lot to do in October. We're going to identify the recipients of the survey, and then we're also going to formulate a stakeholder input plan. And then in November, we're going to begin that stakeholder outreach because we know we can't be trying to streamline state programs for our grantees without talking to our grantees. That will be a really important part of this. And so we have to come up with a plan on how we're going to engage with stakeholders, how many we will engage with. And that part of that will depend on the programs that we're looking at. In December, we will finalize our survey. I think I went a little bit out of order, probably because we came up with some last minute changes to this project yesterday. We're gonna draft our survey in October. We're gonna get stakeholder input on our survey before we send it out to our state agencies, and then we'll finalize the survey and distribute it in December. And then in February 2025, we will share first impressions from the survey with the State Funding and Programs Working Group, fix any data issues. We anticipate we might get a lot of questions on like, what does this question mean? Or we might notice that questions may have been answered inconsistently with different understanding. So giving ourselves some time to go through and work those issues out. And then in June 2025, we will bring the draft State Funding and Programs Working Group recommendations for this project to the advisory committee for some peer review. And I'll pass it back over to Cody at this point, but I may hop in during, I may kind of help Cody out a little bit during this conversation. And also just before we ask you for your input, wanted to thank you in advance for any input on this project.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sarah, for presenting on that and also being a big part of putting this together. So we have a bunch of questions. We don't have a ton of time to answer all of these questions, but this is, you know, as you saw, this is a longer term project. If we're actually really going to go through all of these programs and be detailed about how we understand the differences and similarities across programs. We have a few sort of prompting questions, right? Are there additional elements, program elements that the survey should include? What specific programs would you want to see included in the first review? Any recommendations to adjust the timeline or propose next steps? And do you have any suggestions for stakeholder input? Also, just to call out that if folks on this call are interested in like being, you know, more involved in this work, we can definitely follow up and keep you included in a more frequent way than just at your meetings in the future. So happy to talk about that. I see Alex and then Sharon's hands.
Yeah, thanks, Cody, and thank you, Sarah, for that presentation. It's exciting to see this work moving forward. One thing that I would ask that y'all consider adding to the project is a piece of work that includes education of some of your budget staff in the legislature, right? It feels like so many of the barriers that I think you all are going to encounter are statutory ones that are written into trailer bill language kind of at the last minute. And oftentimes I think whether it's assembly budget, Senate budget, I don't know that there's always the most fulsome understanding of what the administrative burden of the requirements they write is. Like HAP 6, for example, you know, there's now monthly reporting in HAP 6. And in talking to budget staff, I think some of them were surprised when I suggested that, you know, that might be problematic for service providers that are going to be asked by grantees to submit information. So I just want to encourage that as this is going, since, you know, June 2025, we'll probably have another round of programs, another round of things written into budget language. Like, let's start educating folks on the legislative side about this now so that we can kind of head off any additional burdens that might be coming down the pike through future rounds of budget trailer bills.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, Alex. And actually something that we didn't mention about the project is that one of the things that we are hoping to identify is which pieces of the program requirements are statutory versus just like which are in our, you know, capacity to change. And so I know Sarah and Danette from CDSS and I and Josh have talked about like, okay, in these draft recommendations, we'll probably have to have multiple sections of like, here's something that like the council can do just as like individual departments. Here's what we would need changed statutorily, right? So I think that education is definitely a good call. Sharon, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I do think it would be really helpful to work with the legislature as you're going through this process, so they're aware that you're doing it. And you know, I think Alex's example is a really good one. I was just gonna also mention it may be helpful to include, you know, some kind of table that lists sources and uses. So like for the local grantees, that they are identifying like all the sources of funding they get, what they use those for, so that HCD has like a big picture of what all of the funding is going for and how the local community is coordinating that funding. And this, again, consistent with like the HAP requirements for the regional plans. But just would be good to, you know, to have that across the program so that you're getting a sense of where there are gaps and how local grantees are filling those gaps.
Yes, definitely. I think one thing we're trying to do a little bit with this survey too is get the information that we would need to do and have an updated sort of strategic spending guide that which is a document we've put out in the past that sort of lists the major state and federal funding sources around housing and homelessness and like what their uses are, right? And what we could potentially use them for. So as a guide for both state partners, but also local partners. So definitely we'll be looking at that. But yeah, that's a good call out.
Yeah, and just also appreciate the work being done on this. This is something we also, I think a number of the advocates thought would be a really good idea. So
Yeah, thank you. And Ludmilla, I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you. I love following Sharon Rappaport because what she says is consistently brilliant and
thank you.
Yeah. What I have which might be related to what she said is that I have a real concern around grouping eligible activities all together as one thing. I really feel that there should be two lines, maybe, you know, possibly a third, but two eligible activities in common with other programs and project specific eligible activities. And the reason for my concern is that in order to simplify things, what I see as a bureaucratic tendency at the local level to make everything the same, okay? And the result of that has been some really missed opportunities on ways that funding could be used to support specific things that the public or the administration or providers want to do, okay? want to provide and difficulty doing that because it's not clear and they want to have. Anyways, it kind of gets mushed together, and what happens is things end up being same old when there was opportunities for growth or change. Yeah, and what I've seen, along with that, what I've seen take the most time and confusion and energy is like when a NOFA comes out or when an RFP comes out, is people trying to figure out each individually, and people trying to figure out what will this funding stream cover, and so just a highlight line in there that says, what this covers is in common with other things, what it covers that are program specific, I mean, and some kind of in terms of, does this cover capital expenditures, outreach, health and behavioral things, just some cues like that, some clues to what will really help save a lot of time and bandwidth, because it's in trying to analyze it and having that big maybe around, does this maybe cover this, or does it maybe not, or will we get in trouble with the state if we try to do this? That's what's taken up like the most bandwidth of anything. Just painting it with a broad brush. And
Yeah.
thank you so much for
Thank you.
considering that breakdown. Possibly a
Yeah.
third would be what is really prioritized by this funding thing. What is it that they want to really see? Like during COVID, it was people being healthy, and in other things, it's build more permanent supported housing, so just a one-liner on those would be so helpful to let those of us at the end users be able to go, oh yes, this is this. They really want us to do more outreach, for example. Let's fund some of that. It'd be brilliant. Save a lot of time and energy. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Ludmilla. And I put the link to our strategic funding guide that I keep mentioning in the chat. I think it does have some of that information, but would love to talk to you more to see what additional information on top of that for these programs you'd want to see. And I will say the intention is not necessarily to look at all these programs and then make them all the same, right? It's to understand like where can we smooth out the process so that the programs are still doing what they're intended to do, but the administrative burden is less on the recipients. So that's just clarifying the intention there. And I'm gonna go ahead. Unfortunately, we are running low on time here. And so I'm gonna go ahead and wrap up our comments so that we can get to public comment. And so I think this is the last slide here. Is there anything else in here? Thank you all though so much for your thoughtfulness on both of these items. As you can tell, this is not the last time we'll talk about either of these. And as I mentioned, if there's anything that comes up after this meeting that you wanna talk about, feel free to let us know. So I will now move us to general public comment, and I will pass it to Claire.
Thanks, Cody. All right, so we will now be accepting general public comments. Thank you for your patience, and we appreciate the committee members for listening to public comment at the end of this meeting. We welcome all comments and feedback. Due to the structure of this public meeting, we will not be able to respond to any questions. If you do have any questions for CalICH or the committee, please email us at calich@bcsh.ca.gov. Everyone will get 2 minutes for their comment, and a CalICH staff member will soon share a timer on their screen, and I will warn you when your time is up. If you are connected through Zoom, please select the raised hand icon in the meeting window on your computer, and we will unmute you. For those joining by telephone, please press *9 to indicate that you would like to comment. And then when instructed to do so, please press *6 to unmute yourself. Okay. So let's see. Okay. All right, Muriel, please go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Yes, I'm a local activist here in Sacramento, and I started following the homelessness problem issue early in COVID. And one thing that I think I've noticed, and by the way, this has been a very enlightening experience listening to all of this. One thing I've noticed that I think often what will happen is a local jurisdiction will get a chunk of money, and then a whole lot of that ends up getting spent on staff costs rather than direct services to the homeless. They need to have water and food and sleep and just, some stability. And I have some other ideas and observations that I will share with the email that you so thoughtfully provided. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. All right, Arlene, I see your hand up next. You have 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Arlene Hip. I'm in the city of Oakland, California. One of the things that really is prevalent to me is the fact that you made a statement in one of your slides that says seeking and valuing, but you did not say implementing any of the lived experiences, suggestions on the design of programs. That was number one. Number two is the focus of only housing first, when, as the other young lady spoke of, not everybody is prepared to move into an apartment and wind up losing the place simply because they are not equipped. And so we need to make multiple layers for people who are unhoused, and organizations are working to bring them out of that. Number three is supportive housing in collaboration with workforce development. Is workforce development included in the conversation for those who are unhoused, not only from CalWorks, but also for the industries that are needed here in the state of California, depending on the county that you're in? Number four, oh my goodness gracious, I'm sorry, I lost my train. But anyway, I'll just go with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. At this time, I see no other hands raised, so I will pass it back to Cody to close us out.
Great. Thank you all, and thank you for the members of the public who joined us today and listened into this conversation and provided public comment. We really appreciate your time today. As we do for the members of the advisory committee who are here, really, truly, this was a very helpful, fruitful discussions. Really gave us a lot to think about. So just appreciate your time and your commitment to this work. So with that, I want to thank you all who are here, and we hope you'll join our next council meeting, which is actually on September 5th. And our next advisory committee meeting, as a reminder, is on November 12th, 2024. So with that, our meeting is adjourned at 3:03. So thank you all, and see you again soon.